A thought that crosses my mind a lot when watching new movies is how the entire art form technically has led up to whatever I'm watching. Whether I say that smiling because I watched Parasite or Dunkirk and I'm glad at the artistic possibilities we've grown to realize, or baffled because somehow the totality of our collective cinematic knowledge produced the Emoji Movie and Cats, this is not an active thought with every movie I see, but it's still technically true. With that premise accepted, it is empirical that, at a point, the entire history of cinema existed just to get us to Joker. And some people believe that way more than others. This is a movie that attracts very strong opinions. I've got a shorter review of Joker hidden somewhere in my 2019 recap, but that is clearly not enough. When this movie was announced amidst DC scrambling for ideas that would work in the wake of the DCEU imploding on itself, the idea of a movie where Joaquin Phoenix would play the Joker kept a little nook in my brain occupied, curious how it would pan out. Little did I know how much this film would dominate film culture in the 6 months after it came out. Seriously, if Parasite hadn't come out, Joker might have won Best Picture, and the world would have exploded. But it's a year later. The initial hype has worn down, and now I'm free to examine the radiant coals of the vicious fire of hype and backlash. As is the case with many movies that become divisive as Joker, it is nowhere near as good nor as bad as people claim. I'm on the side that Joker is watchable and sometimes even good without ever achieving true greatness. I think the movie is a giant mixed bag, and if I'm reading the reactions to the film correctly, that's a stance that's gonna please nobody. The source of all relevant commentary surrounding Joker, textual or otherwise, whether the commentator knows it or not, always comes back to one thing: its ambition. As opposed to the high-action spectacle of traditional comic book movies, Joker is fairly grounded and realistic. Even with villains like Clayface and Mr. Freeze, Batman has a relatively tame mythos among DC's collection of space gods, magic users, and aliens. Even a movie like Logan, which attempts much the same thing as Joker, preserves fantastical elements of science fiction. Joker has no desire to do that, shedding the Joker's backstory of physical and mental transformation induced by an accidental dip in toxic chemicals in favor of severe mental health problems and unchecked abuse, shaping him into a villain. Batman is nowhere to be seen, and in fact doesn't even exist in the film's universe yet. Borrowing a few superficial elements of The Killing Joke and The Dark Knight Returns, Joker keeps the character a downtrodden dead-end stand-up comedian, but aims to contextualize the universe in the harsh reality of societal deterioration. Which puts more pressure on the film, but let's see what it offers up. Arthur Fleck is a man living in Gotham City. It sucks there. The streets are covered in trash, and there are dire living conditions across the board. Pretty much the first scene in the movie is him getting robbed and beaten up. To make matters worse, Arthur suffers from severe mental health problems, including a condition that forces pathological laughter. He's a clown for a living, with aspirations in stand-up comedy, but the day he's fired from his job, he murders 3 employees of Wayne Enterprise in self-defense on the subway home. The murders inspire mass protests against Gotham's upper class after Thomas Wayne's response condemns the poor. Meanwhile, Arthur has a budding relationship with his neighbor, and a video of him bombing at a comedy club is mocked on his favorite talk show, hosted by the oft-chucklesome Murray Franklin. It is then hinted by Arthur's mother that Thomas Wayne is his biological father. A few attempts at finding out the truth, including speaking to Wayne directly, don't yield any results. A trip to Arkham State Hospital reveals Arthur's mother is essentially deranged, having adopted Arthur from abandonment and let her boyfriend abuse him. This crushes Arthur's sanity, even revealing the relationship with his neighbor was nothing but a delusion. He kills his mother. Arthur is invited on Murray's show because the clip I mentioned earlier has become quite popular. Finally donning the clown persona of the Joker, Arthur escapes the police and proceeds to go live on the show, confesses he killed the Wayne businessman that started the clown protests, and then kills Murray. Arrested from the back of the police car, Joker sees in full view the riots he started before a car crash sets him free. Elevated above the violence, all eyes on him, Arthur draws a smile in blood across his face to the uproarious cheer of the rioters, thereby assuming the title of Clown Prince of Crime. And then there's a dumb minute-long epilogue on Arkham Asylum. From a plot perspective, Joker is a little weird to me. Certain aspects of the film, the clown protests especially, could be the focus of an entire film on their own. But until the last 20 minutes, they're mostly just lurking in the background, forgotten until the plot needs them again. Joker does this a lot. It's really unfocused. Something will be set up only to be abandoned and brought back 30 minutes later. Once we hit the second act, Arthur is devoid of agency, with the plot only moving forward through him coincidentally learning new information. Arthur finds out Thomas Wayne might be his dad. Arthur finds out Murray wants him on the show. In most movies, new information takes the characters from one place to another. For instance, the first act of Star Wars sees Luke guided by information that naturally leads him to the next part of the story. The distress signal from Leia leads him to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who tells him about the rebellion, which Luke only decides to join after he learns his uncle and aunt have been killed. When Arthur gets invited on Murray's show, it just kinda staples more movie on there. Without these tidbits of new information, there's nowhere Joker's plot seems like it could go. Nothing else is going on when that happens. There are a few sparsely believed fan theories I don't agree with. Besides the hallucinations involving his neighbor, I don't think any part of the movie is a figment of Arthur's imagination. The end of the movie does not prove the film was all a flashback. If the movie was all fake, why does he remember Thomas and Martha Wayne dying? He wasn't there. That would also mean he thought to include the fact that he imagined a relationship with his neighbor within this whole scenario he's already imagining. Whenever I see this theory used, it's usually to deflect criticism towards parts of the movie that are either silly or don't make sense by turning Arthur into an unreliable narrator. Okay, I'll stop there. If it sounds like I'm being overly hostile to Joker already, I get it. Let me explain myself a little. So about a year ago, I started this project where I would watch every movie I hadn't seen on the American Film Institute's Top 100 American Movies of All Time list. I post most of the reviews on my blog, enabling me to plug them in this video. Now I don't know about you, but when I watch movies on that list and in that context, I do so with my expectations expanded a little. If you're gonna distill all of American cinema into the best 100 titles there are to offer, then every single movie on there, theoretically, should be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. I get the list was made by committee and other factors go into the choices they made, but that's the implication. Not every movie matches that expectation. But it wasn't always because the movie was bad. There's a huge middle ground between a bad movie and one of the greatest of all time. If I'm gonna talk about a movie on that list when I don't think it's one of the best ever made, or I can't see why someone else would, I ought to think about why that is when I formulate my thoughts on it. This forces me to be a bit more critical, understand the flaws of the movie in greater detail than I usually would. If you've already put together where I'm going with this, I don't blame you. There are going to be parts of this review where I get frustrated at Joker, but I want you to keep in mind that I still find the film decent overall. My more passionate criticisms only apply because not only do I have to prove the film is good enough to earn a 6, but I'm also debunking the idea that it is a perfect 10, which is a belief a lot of people seem to hold. The hype has not made Joker any worse to me. I do not hate this movie. I harbor very little ill will towards it, but the exorbitant amount of praise it has is so far beyond what it deserves. What we have to understand is the pedestal which people are putting Joker on and evaluate it from there. This is a very important part of the review. Critique of Joker is often rife with comparison because it owes so many parts of its presentation and story to other movies, namely Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. These movies are already hailed as fantastic and shape many people's idea of what a masterpiece is. This puts Joker under a lot of unnecessary pressure, usually resulting in it landing on the bad side of such comparison. This may at first sound unfair. Fans of Joker tend to like those movies as well, but argue they shouldn't all be in competition with one another. Don't try to belittle Joker by comparing it to masterpieces. If you really think about it, that is a tacit statement of admittance from the fans that Joker is not as good as those movies. That would be fine, but the thing is, the fans don't keep up their end of the bargain. You can't say, don't compare this movie to Taxi Driver, or King of Comedy, or Falling Down, while simultaneously singing the praises of Joker above them with such enthusiasm. I will be holding Joker to the standards of a masterpiece because the masses treat it like a masterpiece. If I actually made videos with any kind of substantial viewership, there'd be some jackoffs in the comments trying to debunk this, that people don't treat Joker the same way they do Taxi Driver. But if I can be frank, I think most of these people are... how can I put this? Lying. Joker is not some little film where the people who like it have no camaraderie to fall back on. There is no possible way to spin the narrative where liking this film is the unpopular thing to do. It is currently in the top 50 movies of all time on IMDb, peaked at number 9, has a 90% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes out of 136,222 ratings, got 11 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, won 2 of them, and was a massive online hit. People are more defensive towards Joker than they are themselves. If Joker was a woman, you'd all be the biggest simps on the face of the planet. The only people who don't like Joker are dudes who post one-sentence joke reviews on Letterboxd. Go to any YouTube comment section, any forum talking about Joker, and you'll find droves and droves of fake deep comments acting like this is the best movie ever made, with thousands of likes and dozens of replies agreeing or attacking anyone who dare disagree. Don't you dare think you're going against the curve by liking Joker as if you've made some controversial pro-gamer move just because some people talk shit about it on CNN for a week. You goddamn pussy. There's one other reason I feel compelled to critique Joker like this, and that's the unoriginal way it manifests these inspirations. Let's be clear, stylistically what Joker is going for is so similar to these movies it's tantamount to plagiarism. Certain plot beats and characters are one-to-one analogs to ones from King of Comedy and Taxi Driver. It is not homage, it is ripping off. You shouldn't be allowed to dismiss comparison at all when the film is inviting those comparisons, banking on those comparisons for you to like it. Masterpieces like Taxi Driver will inevitably influence the genre, yes. In the wake of a masterpiece, they will inspire filmmakers to make movies that are similar but not as good. What this does not mean is the films are cheap imitations. You can be inspired without stealing, which Joker does not do. If you take 2 movies where one is clearly inspired by the other in some way, let's take Blade Runner and The Fifth Element. The city in The Fifth Element, with its overemphasis on verticality and rows of elevated traffic, is oddly reminiscent of Blade Runner's Los Angeles. The difference is, Fifth Element does not constantly draw reference to Blade Runner. Its identity does not solely come from things Blade Runner did first. It has other things to like about it and does original things of its own. It's not like Blade Runner gets a pass either, because it did the exact same thing with Metropolis. Blade Runner City seems so fresh and original because it itself was a completely repurposed version of Metropolis' city design. A good number of people maybe didn't even know Metropolis had the influence it did on Blade Runner. I mean, some of you probably did, but that just goes to show Blade Runner can be seen as its own unique reference point of inspiration. Because it's so different from Metropolis, it's easy to forget the influences it had on Blade Runner. That movie inspired a shit ton of Blade Runner. But again, there were enough differences that it didn't seem like they were trying to copy it. You want to see a movie that perfectly uses Taxi Driver as inspiration? Look at Drive. Both movies are character studies about lonely men seeking greater purpose in life with an occupation that requires them to drive around. Both have plots that revolve around their inability to make a love connection and are known for their hyperviolence. And yet, you would never call one a ripoff of the other. See my frustration at this? There's nothing in Joker that creates that buffer zone between it and its inspirations. I don't see a single thing in this film besides some clunky references to comic book characters that distinguishes it from King of Comedy or Taxi Driver. It is an early Scorsese ripoff. It has no new ideas with its presentation and themes whatsoever. The only thing it has going for it to distinguish them is Joaquin Phoenix giving it his all. My problem is not so much with the things it addresses, but the way it addresses them. Joker, at its core, wants to say something about society. I think it fails. Maybe the film could be thought-provoking about mental illness or classism in that it might inspire people to have sophisticated thoughts of their own, but it is, in itself, a bad presentation of these issues. I referenced Taxi Driver earlier and how Joker is very similar to it. Of all the films Joker rips off or is inspired by, I think Taxi Driver is its closest equivalent. The largest discrepancy between the two is the quality of screenwriting. In terms of the film text itself, Joker's greatest flaw is the directing and writing by Todd Philips. He's overreached his intellectual grasp to an unprecedented degree with this script and hadn't a prayer of understanding how to write something that matches the weight of the issues he pretends to address. As a result, Joker is an aimless, muddled societal think piece, should you choose to designate it as one. For all the rubbing elbows with Scorsese Phillips tries to do, I think I summed it up best in my old review. While not without its moments, this movie is not deep. It's not nuanced. It is not clever. Every detail about Arthur's mental state and how awful Gotham is to live in is so on the nose and unsubtle. Much like Joker, Taxi Driver's protagonist, Travis Bickle, is a dejected loner corrupted by the bleak deterioration of human nature. The way Martin Scorsese communicates that depravity without beating you over the head with it is fantastic and works on multiple levels. For example, the way he integrates Travis's occupation into the narrative. You see the grime of New York City, especially after dark. Anybody would want to stay off those streets as much as possible, locked in their homes so the degenerates can't find them. But Travis doesn't have that luxury. He, as you may have guessed, drives a taxi. He has to invite the toxicity of the outside world into his life in order to survive. When there's no escape from seeing how bad everything has gotten out there, his slipping mental state and decisions as a character make more sense. Joker doesn't have that kind of nuance anywhere. The way it communicates ideas and themes is always surface level. Arthur gets beat up by some kids, and Philip seems to think that's enough. Todd Phillips' idea of thematics is taking the social commentary he wants the audience to retain and saying, why don't we have the characters just say that? How do we communicate that it sucks to live in Gotham? Have the character say so. How do we communicate that the upper class doesn't care about the lower class? Have the character say so. How do we communicate that Arthur inadvertently started a movement? Have the characters say so. How do we communicate that people have no decency anymore? Have the characters spell it out like you're goddamn 5 years old. The way Joker treats mental illness is just as insipid and backwards too. It's not like Suicide Squad where he's got damaged tattooed on his forehead, which... Okay, if I'm gonna compare Joker to masterpieces, I may as well note the advantages it has over 1 out of 10 movies too. There are parts of Joker that do this well, like Arthur's laughing condition based on the real-life pseudobulbar effect. It's a fun thematic idea for the Joker of all characters to laugh uncontrollably because of mental illness. It's impossible to argue any incarnation of the character since Nicholson's isn't totally insane, so whatever, it's a good way to fit the motif. But, like everything else in the movie, it's so spelled out and simplified. He has a notebook full of crazy person chicken scratch, and one page with mental illness in giant letters. Like seriously? That's symbolism to you? People who love this movie tout it all proud like, oh, Joker is a masterpiece. You just didn't understand it. You see, it's actually a film about mental illness. Like, no shit. It's not even good at highlighting treatment of the mentally ill. It certainly doesn't think much of dwarfism. The film treats Arthur like he's a perfect angel, but what about his mom? Joker treats her mental illness with nothing but contempt. It reduces her character to a crazy old bat at best and a sociopathic monster at worst. We're shown her mental health was clearly shot even when she was young. She probably went through a lot of the same neglect and torture society inflicts upon Arthur. The difference is, we're not supposed to feel bad for her. And before some smartass tries to say the movie is actually super deep and that I'm just a moron by justifying this decision as the film showing mental illness isn't an excuse for your actions, first of all, Arthur kills a TV host for making fun of him. Second of all, the crux of the movie is Arthur being justified in doing what he did because of how society treated him and his mental illness. That is the whole point of the movie! Even if that stupid excuse for how the film treats her actions were the point, it is in direct conflict with Arthur's arc. Philips wrote it into his movie that Arthur murders his mentally ill mother as a part of his justified retribution. It's not broadening the issue, it's reducing it. For all of the fans posturing about how Joker enlightens us to the struggles of the mentally ill, it has us root for the murder of someone who is a product of those struggles. That makes no sense from any semiotic or ideological perspective. Why? Because Todd Philips did not give a shit about writing the supporting cast in a way that was developed, helped tell the story, or made the most basic amount of f***ing sense as long as it gave the film opportunities to show how much Arthur's life sucks and make his turn remotely believable. She's not the only one written this way either. None of the characters feel like real people. Everybody only exists in reference to Arthur. I get he's the protagonist, but I mean it feels like these characters have no personality or, character beyond their relationship and interactions with him. Murray, the detectives, the Waynes, Domino from Deadpool 2, even Arthur's own mother are all just prop characters with zero development agency or purpose besides developing Arthur. Compare it to Taxi Driver. Martin Scorsese gave himself a cameo and this happens.
Cammy, you see the light up there? The window? The light. The window up there in the second floor. What, are you blind? Do you see the light? Yeah. Yeah, you see it. Good. You see the woman in the window? Do you see the woman in the window? Yeah. You see the woman? So I want you to see that woman because that's my wife. But that's not my apartment. It's not my apartment. You know who lives there? Huh? No, I mean, you wouldn't know who lives there. I'm just saying. But you know who lives there? Huh? A nigga lives there. I like that. And I'm gonna kill her. There's nothing else. I'm gonna kill her. Now, what do you think of that? I said, what do you think of that? I'm gonna kill her. I'm gonna kill her with a 44 Magnum pistol. I have a 44 Magnum pistol. I'm gonna kill her with that gun. Did you ever see what a 44 Magnum pistol would do to a woman's face? I mean, it would fucking destroy it. Just blow her right apart. That's what it can do to her face. Now, did you ever see what it can do to a woman's pussy? And that you should see. That you should see what a 44 Magnum is going to do to a woman's pussy. You should see.
That one clip alone shows us everything we could possibly need to know about this guy we've never seen before and never see after this. This dude got his own story that extends before, during, and after his interaction with Travis. He is a character with his own agency, relationship to Travis, and serves as an example of the city's moral bankruptcy. He's in the movie for less than 4 minutes! Joker's depravity not only lacks that kind of character, but there's no levels to it either. Again, Taxi Driver does this very well. It starts in a porn theater, then prostitutes get harassed on the street, talk to Harvey Keitel the pimp, finally shoot up the whorehouse, moving up the ladder to the source of illegal sex work. But let's use another film that reminds me of Joker. One that other people aren't really discussing in reference to it ad nauseum. Falling Down.
4!
Michael Douglas plays a guy who goes on a trek across Los Angeles that evolves into a rampage. He's clearly crazy, but the ultimate point of the movie is that the infrastructure of the United States is run by nonsensical corporate greed, disagreement being met with hostility, and disregard for the average citizen. It's a f***ing libertarian wet dream, basically. Douglas's frustration grows the more symptoms of American corruption he's exposed to. situational gang violence, phony smile customer service, neo-Nazis, rich country club elitists. As the movie goes on, Douglas finds each thing more and more reprehensible until he becomes an unhinged f***ing dickhead.
Yeah, now you're gonna die wearing that stupid little hat.
In Joker, Gotham maintains the same level of generic filth and slummy energy throughout the entire movie. You're meant to be amazed by how dark and gritty the city looks, but it gives away all its tricks too early and repeats that imagery over and over again with no progression. If you start a movie like this with the grittiness set to 100, you have nowhere else to go. The trick these movies have to pull is to make the audience think you're starting at 100, but reveal over time that you only started at 60. This is why I don't feel anything through Joker's setting. Once you know how much it sucks to live in Gotham and there's trash everywhere, there's nothing left to understand. Joker has bleaker set dressing on an artistically detached objective scale, as in it looks more run down, but it just plops all that down and looks at you like, what else is there? With Todd Philips pompously content that's all he had to write. And then there's stuff in this movie I just think is stupid for just straightforward reasons. Like Robert De Niro, what the hell, man? He watches this video of Arthur performing, and the joke he makes fun of is,
when I was a little boy and told people I was going to be a comedian, everyone laughed at me. Well, no one's laughing now.
But like, that's an actual joke. It's not original, and it doesn't split your sides or anything, but it is a joke, and Murray treats it like he's outright incoherent. I don't get it. I don't usually like to do this because film criticism and screenwriting are two different skill sets, but even I could fix this scene. Instead of having De Niro mock Arthur's joke, he can just have him reacting to Arthur's nervous laugh. He plays a few seconds of him laughing on stage, and he goes, "You know, at a comedy show, it's the audience who's supposed to be laughing. Poor guy's got it backwards." It shows him mocking Arthur's compulsive laughter, therefore furthering the theme of how society mocks the mentally ill. It also makes the remark more personal to Arthur. It also takes advantage of dramatic irony, because Murray has no idea Arthur has this condition. Speaking of Arthur's mental health, remember when Zazie Beetz was in the movie? I'm not going to pretend there aren't small little details hinting at her dating Arthur being a hallucination, but there was a way for Phillips to show that besides just flashing back to it. Include a few more lines of dialogue showing she doesn't know him. Yeah, the guy who thinks the dialogue is too on the nose wants more dialogue? What a hypocrite. Well, 2 more lines of dialogue is less on the nose than flashing back to the scene for us to get the point. I don't care much for the music choices either. Not the score, but the pre-existing songs scotch-taped into moments where they don't belong. Joker's got a pretty heavy score that just doesn't match with the songs they chose. But most of them aren't too bad, and I could get over them just fine. Weirdly enough, until the film's most famous scene, Arthur dancing down the steps. This is the true birth of the Joker as we know him. You'd think there'd be something epic and heavy to accompany it, but instead, they went with Rock and Roll Part 2, which is probably the stupidest thing in this whole movie. You have your emotional turning point where the downtrodden protagonist assumes an alter ego to finally combat the corruption of the world, set to the shit you hear during a warm-up jog in elementary school. If I have to explain how this doesn't quite match up with this, then you require help on a more professional level than I can offer you. The references to the Waynes and Batman lore wink a little too hard for me. Joker is bleak as hell, but it still finds time to be cheeky about things like showing Alfred or the irony of Joker and Bruce Wayne both meeting before they have their alter egos. When people sometimes argue that Joker is closer to the average comic book movie than it thinks it is, this self-referential attitude is part of what they're talking about.
What kind of coward would do something that cold-blooded? Someone who hides behind a mask.
I don't agree with that wholesale, but the end especially goes too far for me by showing the Wayne's assassination. It's just so forced in there. 30 seconds, if that, of just some random guy not even trying to rob them. If he just wants to murder the Waynes as revenge, why does he let Bruce live? Usually this encounter is just a robbery that accidentally resulted in murder, and that's why Joe Chill runs away. He just cared about the money. With his motivation just being to kill them, he's no different than anyone else in Joker's movement. So why was he the only one in the middle of this riot to notice Thomas Wayne was there? Remember, the corrupt billionaire this entire movement is rallying against? He would get swarmed the second he walked out there. But hey, credit where it's due. For a kid who just saw his parents shot in front of him, at least Bruce looks really bored. The inclusion of the Waynes is just another example of Todd Philips only putting thought into the characters when they're in service of Arthur's development. But, somehow, he's still not really that well-defined of a character. The movie's job is to make us sympathize with Joker to the point where we understand why he ends up doing what he does. But most of what we learn about him is through the things other people do to him. He gets beat up, he hallucinates having a girlfriend, he gets fired, he gets harassed on a train and forced to kill, his mom turns out to be crazy, and he's mocked for bombing at stand-up comedy. That's fine and good, but what does that tell us about who this guy is as a person? There's no moral complexity here. Like, all I know about Arthur is he gets his shit rocked every day. He's weird, he's mentally ill, he's an abandoned child. Like, of course I'm gonna feel bad for him, but that's just so cheap. It presents his retribution as so one-sided. I have no idea who this guy is, what he's like, so there's not the emotional connection that takes it to the next level. Look at a character like Thanos. This is a guy who has literal control over reality and still thought the best way of managing resource depletion was to kill half of the universe. And that's without addressing inequality in resource distribution and exponential population growth, bringing us back to exactly where he started in a few generations' time. From a philosophical standpoint, he's not a character that makes the most sense. But the film had a way of endearing us toward him and let us understand who Thanos was as a person. And it worked. People actually started saying Thanos did nothing wrong. For a character study, which in part Joker is, the movie is so content to go without studying his character. This to me is the pinnacle of what Joker represents. A series of pointlessly bleak events in service of nothing. It means nothing, it says nothing. It beheads any semblance of political relevance it wants to have, yet insists upon its own importance. A literal tale told by an idiot, signifying nothing.
Hear me call, hear my name, Carnival.
Okay, so believe it or not, there's actually some stuff I like about Joker. As much as I complained about the lack of subtlety or anything to sink your teeth into, there is one scene I really liked and got across a significant, poignant idea very well. It's right here at the end, where Joker kind of accepts his role as the leader of this movement. As much as he's wanted to be loved and respected, the film indicates his immediate desire is just not to get beat up on the street. To him, it's never been about being a revolutionary or a leader, but in the center of this riot he started, he takes the blood that's in his mouth and paints a smile on himself. At this time, I remembered the quote,
"For my whole life, I didn't know if I even really existed. But I do. And people are starting to notice."
And here he is, elevated above everyone else with all eyes on him. But at what consequence? He puts on a fake smile, literally made of his own suffering, all just to please the movement he didn't really care about starting. As a symbol of his pain, it took him until this moment for people to notice him. He's clearly happy to do it. This is his big moment of triumphant acceptance. But the sad truth behind it is he'll never be seen unless he's in pain and wears it for the sake of others. The movie needed more moments like this. It doesn't spell out what Arthur is feeling, there's no dialogue bluntly describing the metaphor, there's no one-sidedly written characters. It's just an intense moment of storytelling that shows the arc of the protagonist. You know, like a movie. But in specific terms of what I liked about Joker, I mean, come on. Joaquin Phoenix was already one of the best actors working today before Joker came out, and this is just another gem in his infinity gauntlet of weirdo loner characters. I think it's absurd, personally, that anyone finds his portrayal of the Joker as good as Heath Ledger's, but hey, this is the positive part of the video, let's not talk about that. It'd be easy to say he gave a good performance and leave it at that, but the longer I think about it, the more I realize how integral Joaquin is to Joker's success. I obviously have my problems with Arthur's character, and yet in the hands of a less talented actor, the writing could have come across so much more painful. Arthur is awkward, he's creepy, he is obsessive, and honestly a huge dork. This isn't Christian Bale playing Patrick Bateman, this isn't Jake Gyllenhaal playing Louis Bloom, where there's fun, charismatic parts to their character, and they get to go crazy. There is nothing about Arthur that we should aspire to be. There is no glitz or charisma that Arthur is supposed to have. Arthur looks like the dude who comments "you're beautiful" on all your girls' Instagram pics even though she's 22 and he's like 46. Look at this guy and tell me he wouldn't spend hundreds of dollars to hear Pokimane say his name. And it's very easy for actors to accidentally make a character like that super unlikable. Comic book villains have been misdirected and miscast where this exact kind of backfire has happened before. My proof? Jamie Foxx's Electro, Guy Pearce's Killian, Jim Carrey's Riddler. We have to take a character like Arthur seriously for Joker to work, and through Phoenix's performance, people do. But how exactly does he manage that? The short answer, he's authentic, he's scary, and even though the movie has an over-reliance on him, he keeps the character interesting and plays him with actual tragedy. The best part of Joaquin's performance as the Joker is how well he communicates the pain Arthur is going through. When forced to laugh because of his condition, he does so like it physically hurts him. You can see it on his face, he'd give anything to stop, but his body won't let him. Phoenix comes across as somebody who's had every little bit of goodwill and happiness snuffed out by the world around him. And even though I mentioned before how that world is written with no subtlety and over-explained to the point of tedium, you believe the harshness of Gotham because it comes through in how Phoenix reacts to it, horrified and afraid of its abuse. Even though there's so much about the way certain scenes are written and executed that leave a lot to be desired, Joaquin sells it so hard. He's what saves Arthur from having no character whatsoever. Physically, Phoenix gets involved with Joker as he does any of his recent performances. Down to how he carries himself and his micro-expressions, you can see the difference between this and his roles in The Master or Her, despite some commonality between the characters. Physicality is a great way for an actor to make a character their own. But especially in a movie like Joker that chronicles such a transformation, it's extra poignant that you can see Phoenix is still the same person at the end of the movie despite the changes he's gone through. The way he runs like he's used to being beaten when he gets caught speaks more volumes about Arthur than Todd Philips writing around having him say "we live in a society" verbatim ever could. Phoenix is scary in the film as well, which again plays back into the effect his environment has had on him. Muddled themes about mental health aside, Joker doesn't perceive Arthur's psychosis as inherently volatile. Aware of this, Phoenix doesn't play the role as someone about to snap of their own accord, but of someone pushed to the brink of their mental limits. He's a talented enough actor to differentiate the two, and this makes the difference with the story they want to tell. Heath Ledger's Joker, although in my mind the better performance, would not work with what this Joker wants to accomplish. The identity of Ledger's Joker is predicated on bitter hate for humanity, whereas Joaquin's is born of necessity. It is a defense mechanism. Joaquin Phoenix is a creative mind that took this project seriously. Taking charge of some scenes, it was his decision to do the dance in the bathroom scene, to hide in the fridge later in the film too. These stranger, improvised moments weren't in the script and gave the movie a few spots of authenticity. I don't give that credit to Todd Philips. That's all on Joaquin, and it gave more life to the character. Even though everything good about the film does not come from him, at least Philips was surrounded by a few people who were smart enough to work with the lackluster script. But there's one other thing that really ties the film together, and that's the music. It gets overshadowed by Joaquin a lot, but if you look at award season, besides Phoenix, the score is always the only other thing that won. It has way too many Oscar nominations, but if Joker had to win anything besides Best Actor, I think it deserves Best Score the most. It's refreshing to have something about this film with such a simple explanation as to why I like it. No qualifiers, no narrative hijacking by the media or audience fanaticism, no being inhibited by Todd Philips' script, doesn't even require much explanation. Just a good original score that helps the movie tell the story. This woman, Hildur Guðnadóttir, composed the soundtrack and deserves a lot more credit than she's getting, because she's the unsung hero of this film. She was a cellist for movies like Prisoners, Arrival, The Revenant, and Sicario, and the very same year Joker came out, wrote the Grammy and Emmy-winning soundtrack to Chernobyl. She won 3 of the 4 awards required for an EGOT in 1 year. Not for nothing, but Bong Joon-ho didn't do that. Ripped from its context, the music is still good. I find it relaxing, actually. Most of it. Some of it's a little intense. Tons of great strings work in here, though. It's the one thing in this film that builds atmosphere without flaw. This score belongs in a movie as good as people think Joker actually is. It's so good it inadvertently tricks people into an emotional reaction becoming of something that's much better written. Yes, Joaquin gave a great performance, but in terms of really sealing the deal for those that like it, I think the score is the most important part of Joker's cinematic anatomy. Like, look at this bathroom scene. Arthur just killed 3 people, and he's supposed to go into the bathroom and process what he's done. That's a familiar kind of scene, but Joaquin's improvised dancing and Hildur's score create this atmosphere, like an out-of-body experience. The moment gets a chance to settle. If you've ever heard me talk about Rise of Skywalker, these are the kind of moments that film lacks completely. On a baseline level, these are the 2 things that win people over to Joker. Together, they provide powerful resonance with Arthur as a character, even though the connection isn't really based on anything and the material itself lacks flavor. And besides all of my issues with the story, the film is very competent. As much as it rips off the look and feel of Taxi Driver, well, I like the look and feel of Taxi Driver. I find nothing about the technicals all that special, but since I haven't really addressed it so far, and I don't have many problems, I figured this is the best place to talk about it. Don't particularly think it's Oscar-worthy for its cinematography, editing, costume design, makeup, or sound, but they all get the job done satisfactory enough. I guess I don't care for some of the sound effects when people get hit. But that's my biggest complaint. What's complicating things then? Or rather, who? Consider this addressing the elephant in the room. Until now, you may have noticed I'm limiting my interpretation of Joker to a purely textual one, because unfortunately, there are meanings attached to this film that did not come from the text. And they're the ones, I believe, that fuel the intense love of this film. The Joker has always been a character with an edge to him, but especially after The Dark Knight, he wasn't just seen as the cackling counterpoint to Batman, but an intelligent person who would wax poetic about the faults in human nature and the ills of society. I would like to remind everybody that George Costanza walked so the Joker could run.
We live in a very superficial society.
Because of society, right?
You know, we're living in a society!
The fabric of society is very complex, George.
But that should go without saying. The Dark Knight was revolutionary to mainstream movies because suddenly the philosophically dangerous character was more intimidating than the one with physical superiority. If Joker could prove his outlook on humanity was correct, it didn't matter how hard Batman hit him. All that mattered was invalidating the morality of those Batman fights for, which in turn would invalidate Batman's strength. Joker's ability to actualize this, what gives him the motivation to keep up with Batman at all, is rooted in his conviction towards the belief he's pulled back the curtain of society and understands their morality better than they do. And these are the traits we now see in incels. The point of this video is not to accuse you of being an incel and doing the things I'm about to accuse this community of if you like Joker. Even if you were, I have no proof unless you admit it, which I doubt you'd want to. But deep inside, you know whether or not you are. Hidden in your subconscious, you know whether or not that's what you're doing. Dig deep enough inside any incel and you'll find they're secretly aware they are tiny men full of irrational anger. When the first trailer for Joker dropped, people flocked to it. This was the first indication of what the plot would be, and the first time we learned the Joker's origin was that of a dejected man shunned and beaten down by society and turning his pain outward. This is what we call a Cinderella situation. The slipper could not have fit the foot more perfectly than it did here. Other people were looking forward to Joker with healthy anticipation, but the incel community ate it up. The Joker was already this neckbeard icon for the aforementioned societal edginess, but I guess they needed a new idol. Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was quickly pushed into that same mold, treated as the definitive gamer Joker. The title of gamer having evolved a little, and thanks to a little murky nomenclature thanks to memes, is often used to make jokes about them being oppressed and is the context in which they were referring to the Joker. It's supposed to be ironic, a joke implying the systemic horrors of the oppressed are the same as being made fun of for playing video games. Which, okay, this is an entire video on its own, but the incel community does not tell jokes. They manifest their harmful beliefs through humor because they know they can use the guise of a joke to avoid taking responsibility for what they say. They looked at this new Joker movie, saw themselves in Arthur, and suddenly the film is Citizen Kane for incels. There's just one problem with that. The Joker, Arthur, is not an incel. Arthur is not a spiteful character. The Joker in this film doesn't act entitled. He doesn't demand the world treat him like he's special, just that they don't beat him up. When you get down to it, Arthur spends a lot of the movie trying to better himself through steps like getting a girlfriend, looking for his biological father, and trying stand-up. All of these things crash and burn traumatically, but for a while the underlying tone of Joker is that of cautious optimism. Not a single one of those qualities is one I would ascribe to incels. Arthur certainly has more to complain about than they do. The ills inflicted upon Joker include physical and mental abuse since he was a child, physical abuse from other people on an implied regular basis, extreme poverty, and mental health issues that genuinely impair his ability to function in society beyond generalized anxiety, depression, or BPD. Now compare that to the ills inflicted upon incels, which include women don't want to date them. This is where the split between Joker's intended messages and the ideas thrust upon it comes from. The film is not validating these people by virtue of media text alone, but incels are the kind of people willing to perform the mental gymnastics required to equate their pain with Joker's and force the movie to empower them. Now Joker's muddled and vague commentary becomes a genuine problem. Incels see this film as an analog for how they feel the world treats them. Then this ideology the movie doesn't really have is reverse engineered into something the movie's actually saying. If you want to oversimplify the plot, you can say Joker only did what he did because people were mean to him. There's nothing special about his pain, nothing to keep them from doing that. It's like an early One Direction song where the lyrics are vague by design so their fangirls could insert themselves into the narrative and pretend they're the one the boys are singing about. Joker's vagary allows him to be a self-insert to a community already so toxic they ruin everything they touch. I genuinely believe Todd Philips wanted to make a movie that provoked thought about mental health and class inequality, using a popular comic book villain as a means to spread that message as far as possible. This is not a bad thing. Whether or not it worked is irrelevant to the fact they hijacked the narrative by designating Joker as their Black Panther. At that point, there was nothing Joker could do. Once word spread that Joker was now this beacon of toxic empowerment, the film became controversial. The meaning was misplaced as if the film itself meant to provoke violence, and people started fearing Joker would inspire mass shootings. This turned out to be false, but for a while the news was genuinely discussing this possibility, and movie theaters actually beefed up security during the film's run. I remember seeing like a half-dozen extra police officers in the hall when I went to see it. By creating a narrative like this, you're giving in to what these incels wanted to accomplish, what they want you to think of them. They want to be victimized because that's what gives them power. These people thrive on the idea that they're societal pariahs. How do you intend on using art to criticize people like that? If you rebuke them, they'll only feel more justified in their rage. Now they can hold this controversy over the heads of the media as an example of how they feel they're oppressed, demonized as potential mass shooters when all they wanted to do was watch a movie. For the incel community, that is a big deal. That is why I think Joker has such an extreme number of fans willing to defend it with such tenacity. They act like they're won over by the film's objectivity when really it just affirms their worldview. It's the exact same thing they accuse other people of doing whenever a woman or minority-led film does well. People get uncharacteristically defensive over Joker. They may not admit or even understand that's why they like this movie as much as they do, but without having such a deep connection to them, these people wouldn't praise and defend Joker with such gusto. That's how media ecology works. This is why media literacy is indispensable today. The audience reshaped the meaning of Joker. That much is clear. They took a movie about a man with a genuine case to start a rebellion, poverty, abuse, classism, being abandoned by the system, and just decided it represented their own suffering. These guys' greatest philosophical background is the heartbreak they experience after a girl rejects them in favor of a man who doesn't have a micropenis. There are people who aren't incels who love this film too. And I sure as hell don't get what they see in it, but their defense of it isn't so childish and mean-spirited. You'll always know when you're dealing with that kind of Joker fan. If Joker was a movie that came out and people liked about as much as something like Wonder Woman or any moderately received Marvel film, that would have been what I think this film deserves. It's deserving of praise, honestly. Despite how negative this review might sound, when I watch Joker, I'm not filled with rage. The lack of subtlety, the muddled themes, they keep me from thinking it's a great film, but they don't frustrate me as much as this review might have you think. Revisiting the film for this review, I found more to enjoy than I thought I would, but much of the praise it's getting is not only overdoing it, but comes from a sinister place. I'm not even sure Todd Philips knew the film would be received the way it was. Honored to the point where the audience itself changed what it was trying to say. A prime example of how powerless a filmmaker is now to decide what their film means. When it comes to changing the world, it achieved nothing of its own merits, and something about that is so morbidly ironic to me. When I see Joker standing above a riot smiling with his own blood, playing to a movement he didn't mean to start, that's what the movie is doing. Joker's greatest sin wasn't a lack of subtlety, bad writing, or a poor plot, but because it came out when a certain group of people were primed and ready to accept it. Just like Arthur.
Yes, George, because of society.